Okay, good evening everyone and welcome along. My name's Jim Waterston and I'm the Dean of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education and feel very privileged to be introducing our speaker tonight and talking about the purpose of tonight's Dean's Lecture. So tonight is the 6th biennial Fritz Duras Lecture in 2019 and it's the 7th Dean's Lecture for the year. So we've had a very strong program and culminating in a really important and worthwhile presentation tonight. So tonight is special as the 6th biennial Melbourne Fritz Duras Lecture held in partnership with the Australian Council for Health, Physical Education and Recreation Victoria, known as ACHPA to those of us that have been involved in physical education for most of our career. And it coincides with the ACHPA State Conference tomorrow, of which Anne will be opening. So we found that out this afternoon when Peter just checked to find out whether Anne knew that she was opening it, but she's come all this way to Victoria, so luckily she was aware. I would like to welcome ACHPA Chief Executive Officer of the Victorian branch, Hilary Shelton, who she is ill, so we'll send Hilary's apologies. Nothing like changing the script on the run. Bernie Holland, who's the Professional Learning Manager, Trent Brown and Adriana Pinder, Professional Learning Coordinators, and my former colleague, I was going to say old colleague, but Peter Wright, who's the President, Amanda Mooney, Vice President. All of you are very welcome here tonight and we thank you for the support of this lecture and for the valuable work that you're doing. I would like to start tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and acknowledge their ancestors past, present and emerging. And if you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, then the Dean's Lecture hashtag Dean's Lecture, there you go, is available. So comments during the lecture would be appreciated and certainly afterwards to let others know what we were privileged to hear tonight. So I'd like to warmly welcome Fritz Duras' son Peter and Peter's wife Sue and their son Tony, as well as Fritz's grandson Steve. I'm delighted that you could all join us and be with us tonight. Before I formally that might be the wrong page. Before I formally introduce our presenter for the evening, I'd like to briefly tell you about the Fritz Duras Lecture. Since 2008, to commemorate Dr. Fritz Duras and to carry on his significant contribution to the University of Melbourne and the wider community in the areas of health and physical education, the Graduate School has held this lecture as a part of the Dean's Lecture series. Dr. Duras' move from Germany was facilitated by one of my predecessors, Professor G.S. Brown, then the Dean of the Faculty of Education, with the aim of establishing a course to train physical education teachers. Dr. Duras, who was a medical doctor and specialised in sports medicine, was appointed Director of Physical Education. Having established the first Australian university course in physical education, he was certainly a pioneer in the field. Tonight we celebrate his legacy with an address from Professor Anne McPhail, who has travelled from Ireland. Anne has worked in the Department of Physical Education and Sports Sciences since 2002 at the University of Limerick and was also the head of the department for 5 years. Her research and teaching interests are in the areas of physical education, teacher education, instructional alignment, curriculum development and curriculum and instruction models. In 2015, she was awarded the Association of Physical Education in Higher Education's Lifetime Achievement Fellowship Award in recognition of scholarly excellence in research and professional practice in physical education, physical activity, sport and sport pedagogy across the lifespan. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Anne McPhail to the stage for tonight's lecture on Mind the Collaboration Gap, Ongoing Learning and Capacity Building in Physical Education and Physical Teacher Education. So without any further ado, thank you for coming all this way, Anne. It's fantastic to have you here and we look forward to the lecture tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. I really appreciate your attendance, particularly if we were in Ireland, there'd be nobody here because the sun is shining, so I truly appreciate your attendance. I would firstly like to thank ACHPA Victoria and the Melbourne Graduate School of Education for the respective invitation to and the hosting of the Dean's Lecture series, and in particular for the honour of presenting as a Fritz Duras Lecture. I spent some time revisiting the footage of previous lecture presenters and admit to being hugely honoured to have been considered a worthy presenter alongside such respected and renowned colleagues that I would know. ACHPA are to be commended on their conference, organisation and programme that includes a complement of exciting and informative sessions over the next 2 days. And the Melbourne Graduate School of Education is to be recognised as one of the top schools of education in the world. Their lecture series, including Fritz Duras Lecture, is one example of a professional event that conveys its commitment to international scholarship. I thank you all for your attendance this evening again, and particularly those of the Fritz Duras family. Middle. There we are. Fritz Duras was clearly a giant in the field of physical education, coming from Germany in the late 1930s to be the first director of the Department of Physical Education at the University of Melbourne, and to lead the new thinking about physical education in schools. As director of physical education, he was to offer the first and what was for many years the only university course in physical education teacher training in Australia. Richard Tinning, the most deserving choice to deliver the inaugural Fritz Duras Lecture in 2008, provided an overview of the beginnings of physical education at the University in Melbourne and the role of Dr. Duras in that history. And I refer you to his contribution for an informative and insightful view of Fritz Duras's legacy. My reference to Dr. Duras, a number of points throughout my presentation this evening, focus on his reported personal attributes and how such attributes are central to the main thesis of my presentation, and that is possessing the passion and skill set to improve one's own learning that can be achieved through learning with and from others in a professional community context. As I tend to do in much of my writing and presentations, I share with you an insight into how my positioning informs my choice of topic for this evening's lecture. I am passionate about my role as a teacher-educator and privileged to be in such a role. I also advocate for the consideration of apprenticeship within our professional journeys and trajectories, appreciating that apprenticeship occurs through participation in a wide range of learning opportunities that allow an individual to progress within and beyond the workplace. I maintain an interest in focusing on the power we, as individuals and as a community, have to 1, entice and encourage individuals into the area of physical education, 2, to mentor them as they develop as scholars, 3, to learn as a collective, and 4, to prepare them to become confident, informed and caring individuals with a continued passion for the field. In turn, those individuals who've experienced such a pathway then take on the mantle of starting the process again by enticing and encouraging physical education colleagues. In revisiting the work of Lavin Wenger, Tennant et al. Comment, learning is not so much a matter of individuals acquiring mastery over knowledge and processes of reasoning, it is a matter of co-participants engaging in a community of practice. The focus is thus on the community rather than the individual. It is participation frameworks that have structure, not the mental representations of individuals. As a field, we need to do more work on establishing participation frameworks and sharing what they look like. This lecture contributes to that consideration. Goffman in 1981 introduced the term participation framework to differentiate how people involved in an interactional setting participate in that setting. Goffman's notion is a means of analysing the various interactional roles played by different people in a group in a particular place. Indeed, in reading Doon MacDonald's 2013 Fritz Duras Lecture, it is apparent that Dr. Duras was appreciative of the importance of participation frameworks. Doon comments that Dr. Duras modelled the civil, respectful and open-minded ways in which debate and discussion in the political as well as the professional arenas should be, and yet is not, conducted. I have noted recently the bottom line remains and can no longer be ignored and denied. There is a significant gap between recommended practices and policies and what happens in the day-to-day realities of schools. To address this, we need to stop working in isolation and work with and learn from each other, while remaining mindful of systematic differences visible nationally and internationally. We must all be involved collectively and with one shared purpose if we are to make the implementation of a new curriculum a defining time now and for health and physical education in the future. This conjures up the notion of activism, and my next reference to Fritz Duras here epitomised activism through the numerous commitments and subsequent contributions he made to national and international sport and physical education initiatives. This lecture considers how best physical education stakeholders can be held accountable for determining an international framework for strategic planning, proactive leadership and adaptive designs. Given that equitable accountability means that all physical education stakeholders be legitimised as contributors, critical contributions of partnerships and professional cultures is a main thread. Physical education stakeholders, for example, teachers, students, schools, teacher educators, pre-service teachers, government agencies, policymakers and communities are challenged to plan and learn together with the intention of delivering collective action strategies. There continues to be a need for greater coordination between researchers, policymakers and practitioners. 3 related considerations are shared this evening and include 1, the roles, responsibilities and weakening boundaries of and between stakeholders, 2, support structures and networking as effective practice, and 3, true partnership and communication across physical education. In exploring the roles, responsibilities and weakening boundaries of and between stakeholders, I choose to focus on scholar-practitioner and practitioner-scholar roles. Again, there is a clear link to Dr. Duras here. Reid in 2011 notes that despite his academic distinction, Dr. Duras was not a remote intellectual, and his involvement in his chosen field included leadership in national and international professional associations, where he lobbied and advocated for physical education. In doing so, he demonstrated the importance of holding a theoretically sound as well as practical view of the field, and of the need for political action to advance an area that was needed to be developed in Australian education. The roles of scholar and practitioner are not mutually exclusive, with an increasing number of practitioners doing scholarly work, and an increasing number of scholars are also engaged in practice and policy. Consequently, this challenges the boundaries between those who are primarily responsible for delivering physical education and those primarily responsible for studying, researching and preparing physical educators. There is a need to support the professional journey experienced by those wishing to become a practitioner-scholar as well as a scholar-practitioner. In turn, this will hopefully result in making explicit the links between theory, research and practice, and finding alternative ways to close the multiple theory, research, practice gaps that restrict the growth of knowledge in the physical education field. There is a growing interest in long-term collaborations between practitioners and researchers that are organised to investigate problems of practice and solutions for improving educational practice. Such collaborations have been termed research practice partnerships, and I provide one such example here. The text Research and Practice in Physical Education was commissioned as a text targeted at teaching and encouraging the physical education teacher profession, including student teachers, teachers in school and teacher educators, to read and interpret research to meet their own needs and those of their students. We made a deliberate decision to capture different lenses by choosing an author team that included 4 qualified teachers who occupied positions of teacher educator, researcher, primary teacher educator and member of a national agency with the responsibility for school curriculum and assessment. Subsequently, the lens of reading research as a primary elementary teacher, as a post-primary physical education teacher, a teacher educator and a researcher are shared with the reader. The boundaries between the different positions were challenged by arranging to meet once a month around a kitchen table in one of our homes to share our respective perspectives on 3 previously identified research papers. In weakening the boundaries that may have existed, our appreciation and acknowledgement of the way in which the same research paper could mean very different things to each of us and in turn our practice was enhanced. And I would admit this is probably the most valuable professional learning activity that I've ever taken part in. The practitioner-scholar role continues to gain support across many jurisdictions that stipulate teacher education programmes are required to provide sufficient space in the programme to prepare pre-service teachers for the role of teacher as researcher or as research-engaged practice. This has subsequently led to a strong emphasis on collaboration between teachers and research activities that strengthen the links between research, policy and practice. Ways that research can contribute to programmes of teacher education have been previously documented. Indeed, it has been suggested that if we are to support schools in becoming inquiry-based learning organisations, that evaluation criteria are designed around how schools engage in research and use research evidence to inform their practice. Again, I provide one such example here. I'm involved in delivering a module titled Applying Research to Practice to student teachers before they embark on school placement. Students are asked to identify a concern they have going on into school placement, for example, classroom management or professionalism. They then search the literature related to that concern and select the most relevant 6 research articles that inform their practice in this area. For each article, they are asked to identify the key findings with implications for their practice, the path for application to teaching, and how they might apply the findings to their own work. They then design a step-by-step action plan on how they intend to use the research findings to impact their practice. Once in school placement, they begin implementing their action plan, finding ways in which to capture what they do and associated outcomes. On completion of school placement, they undertake a presentation that captures their reflections on this experience, sharing what they found out about the concern, what insights they gained from the research literature and application to their practice, and how they might move forward with this application in their next teaching experience. The weakening of the boundaries in this instance result in a reciprocal appreciation and critical commentary between teacher educators and student teachers on the application and implication of research to provide insight into how things might be adapted or revised to improve practice and/or student learning. It is the concept of effective partnerships that will determine the readiness of physical education to work together on collective action strategies with the intent of making progress in meeting physical activity, sport, and health-related needs of children and youth worldwide. The increasing need for professions, primarily through evidence-based practice and academic research, to feed policy and practice in the field heightens the necessity for physical education stakeholders to consider how best to work in partnership and how best to communicate their shared message. An unintentional partnership exists between physical education and physical education teacher education. That is, changes in one influences and is influenced by the other. I believe this is central to our readiness to engage with each other, given the need to develop a reciprocal trust and respect. As teacher educators conducting research with implications for teachers, we need to move away from talking to each other to talking with teachers. This is a key component of the teacher education programme in which I teach. My colleagues and I are engaged with teacher support services, hosting teacher workshops, facilitating teacher professional learning communities, acting as critical friends to practising teachers, and encouraging teachers to undertake new curricular developments. These activities have all played a role in allowing teachers to gain confidence in their knowledge and skills. In a true partnership, knowledge is shared through multiple perspectives, acknowledging that no one person or organisation has a monopoly on the knowledge required for wise decision making. As Western warns, researchers who want to partner deeply need to listen to properly understand a problem as partners define it, and to understand their partners' needs and constraints. Taking these considerations seriously enables researchers to tap into real-world expertise, taking what we know but modifying it for new problems. A challenge to understanding others' considerations is negotiating the most effective mode and style of communication that allows stakeholders' perspectives and expertise to be captured as we move toward agreeing a collective action strategy. Again, I provide one such example here of a true partnership and communication across all stakeholders or numerous stakeholders within physical education. In this example, Ireland was considering the construction of a new curriculum. It was prudent for the specific government agency charged with oversight of curriculum development, the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, to reflect on research evidence, good practice, and international experience that informs meaningful, relevant, and worthwhile physical education. As a result of an international presentation given by a physical education teacher-educator with extensive experience in researching and delivering effective physical education practices, the NCCA approached her and sought her vision for school physical education that places the student at the centre of the learning experience. On determining the vision, discussions and deliberations took place among associated members of the NCCA to consider the desirability and feasibility of the curriculum being proposed. The teacher-educator was available to further qualify the premise of the proposed physical education curriculum, as well as consider, in partnership with the NCCA, the reality of enacting such a curriculum in the specific country context. Once initial agreement was reached on the proposed physical education curriculum framework, the associated document was made available online for consultation by anyone with an interest in contributing to the refinement of the curriculum. For example, teachers, schools, teacher educators, teaching unions, and parent organisations. Focus groups with school students were facilitated by the NCCA in a bid to capture young people's views on the proposed physical education curriculum framework, their role in its design, and their engagement in the curriculum itself at the implementation stage. Once the curriculum was finalised, the same physical education teacher-educator was commissioned to work with the NCCA in upskilling a group of teachers to be confident in delivering the curriculum. Over a 3-year period, teachers were invited to take part in a Teachers Training Teachers initiative, upskilling and preparing them to teach other teachers. The collaborative process thus yielded multiple benefits to many stakeholders who were authentically involved in the initiative. While much has been written about professional learning communities, attention has tended to focus on catering for communities that service a specific group of stakeholders, for example, teachers or teacher educators. Less attention has focused on the notion of professional learning communities that deliberately set out to provide a supportive and safe space for multiple groups of stakeholders. This is where I suggest there is somewhat of a collaboration gap alluded to in the lecture's title. Again, Doon MacDonald in 2013 suggested if what Dr. Duras valued was reflected in his actions, he believed in lifelong learning, the interdisciplinarity nature of knowledge in the field of physical education and health, as well as personal and social action to build community assets. With a view to being proactive in beginning to address this meaningfully within and across physical education, Hal Loss and I have recently co-edited a text. Our focus was to represent the complex ecologies of physical education that arise through conversations in response to specific grand challenges. Writing teams were tasked with presenting a negotiated perspective that incorporates professional partnership in favour of positioning separate experiences. Authors self-identified across a range of professions, such as curriculum manager, education officer, pedagogical coordinator, PhD candidate, programme manager, school teacher, or teacher educator. It should also be noted that while individuals identified currently occupying one position, a number of contributors have transitioned within and across stakeholder groups during their professional career. Such an impressive collection of individuals encourages us to consider who the actors in physical education are and how to most effectively ensure the respective voices are appropriately represented. Critical contributions of partnerships and professional cultures are the main threads throughout this text. For numerous co-authors and predominantly physical education teachers, education officers and programme managers, this was the first time they had been approached by colleagues residing in other stakeholder groups, far less asked if they'd be willing to join a team and work towards a collective action strategy. This resulted in the identification of talented and committed individuals who, while less confident about their abilities to be involved in what in essence was a writing project, could not be faulted on the level of experience, expertise and passion they possess with respect to the specific grand challenge. For other co-authors, and predominantly those working in higher academic institutes, this provided the first or rare opportunity for them to write with different stakeholders. In talking with some of the lead authors, this led to them gaining a new respect for and appreciation of the recognition of possibilities that arises in undertaking such collaborative work. Author teams were asked to propose a collaborative, relevant future research and development agenda for a specialised grand challenge. Analysis of the respective chapters yields 5 components in a shared agenda. 1. The most effective ways to justify and advocate for physical education, as well as providing evidence of student learning in physical education. An improved and sustained shared collaboration with enhanced responsibility, alignment and coherence across PEAT, policymakers and physical education spaces in schools in a bid to ultimately support young people's physical activity, sport and health-related needs. 3. The extension of collaboration beyond subject-specific physical education to encourage physical education stakeholders to be involved in deeper connections across school and community, working towards a strong, integrated educational system. 4. Professional development configurations that provide a shared space for all stakeholder groups and prioritise career-long adaptive competence. And 5. Inter- and multidisciplinary connections that will encourage effective boundary spanning, nationally and internationally, across and external to physical education. And I think it's very powerful when you look across those 13 chapters that the use of collaboration, shared space, is the common thread. To what extent then is physical education ready to engage with collective action strategies from an individual, collective and infrastructural perspective? This includes considering physical education may not yet be in a place where stakeholders and our infrastructures allow for the development of collective action strategies. The question of readiness is very much alive in Ireland, to provide you with an example. Ireland has been able to capitalise on its relatively small size to effect significant and rapid redesign to its post-primary physical education programmes in recent years. There is huge potential for reciprocity between the 3 main PEAT providers, the Physical Education Subject Association, professional development agencies, the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, the teacher regulatory body, the Teaching Council, government departments, and the National Physical Education, Physical Activity and New Sport Ireland Research Centre. These agencies can play multiple roles. For example, they can be engaged with design, delivery and evaluation of new curriculum, as well as supporting curriculum change with teachers and or pre-service teachers. This provides multiple opportunities for individuals attached to such groups to operate in a third space as boundary crossers. One example was shared earlier of a teacher educator who was requested to inform government about programme redesign and was then involved in the implementation of such a redesign. Other examples have included teacher educators and pre-service teachers delivering workshops together to teachers at the Physical Education Association of Ireland conference, 3 PEAT providers working with the NCCA to design materials that align with the learning outcomes of the curriculum, and the PEA's Ireland Research Centre actively encouraging teachers to share best practice. While there is evidence of reciprocity, generally that has been between teacher education and one of the other agencies. Yet, the agencies are not talking to one another, and in some cases, conveying conflicting messages to teachers. Through established working relationships with several of these organisations and agencies, the peak community in Ireland has taken a leadership role in attempting to bring all stakeholders to the table to bridge the collaboration gap. The notion of space and flexibility then, if we take that example, occupies much of our conversations. We are each aligned with many different affiliations, whether it be higher education institutes, research centres, schools or curriculum agencies. More specifically, on a daily basis, the space we occupy includes predominantly an office, a laboratory, school gymnasiums or meeting rooms. Working across these spaces has for some heightened the acknowledgement of how busy we are in working hard in different ways in order to fulfil the different expectations of our respective roles and responsibilities. It is also evident that the spaces some stakeholders occupy allow for a greater level of flexibility, not only in the working day, but also in terms of determining, to some extent, what specific areas they invest their energies. And I think that would be true perhaps of higher education institutes. It is imperative that those of us who are more privileged with space and flexibility consider how to effectively encourage and support ways in which to work with and learn from colleagues operating in other stakeholder groups. In some instances, there is minimal recognition for some stakeholder populations to commit to working with others under the auspices of working towards collective action strategies for education, far less physical education. It is therefore essential that those of us wishing to be involved in such work educate those responsible for recognition within the specific stakeholder fields to the necessity and value of working with those operating at different levels of the education system. The impact of this would be enhanced if members across the stakeholder fields were to join together in advocating for shared recognition. It needs to be made clear that the type of operation is necessary if we are to successfully justify and advocate for school physical education and provide evidence on the learning that takes place in educational settings. This positioning needs to be aligned with considering the most effective way in which such work complements and contributes to already recognised practices and infrastructure. It is likely that dependent on the grand challenge we face or wish to address, there will be a more privileged group of stakeholders who already have some expertise related to the grand challenge and or have inhabited a space where they have experienced the reality of the grand challenge. In such instances, it is prudent that such groups of stakeholders are responsible for establishing, enacting and sustaining partnership work. In doing so, there needs to be an acknowledgement that different groups of stakeholders and partners are not always equally involved, and the implications of the project for their day-to-day interactions and agendas are not the same. I share an example of an education colleague introduced for the first time to engaging in a writing project with other stakeholders, who happen to be two teacher educators. She's a qualified physical education teacher who had taught secondary school physical education in the US for 20 years before undertaking the role of programme manager of pre-K to 12 physical education and health literacy. Through being involved in the project and being encouraged by her writing team, she approached her line manager and explored the possibility of her attending an international sport pedagogy conference where she and her co-authors would share their work. She subsequently received funding to travel and attend what was her first academic conference. She reflected on the experience of presenting, attending other sessions, and engaging in social events with new colleagues. She posted on social media, "One of the most beneficial learning experiences of my professional career, learning from so many educators around the world that are passionate about research, pedagogy, and teaching practice in physical education." Returning to the memory of Fritz Duras and his personal attributes that were captured by his biographer, I believe these characteristics are all essential and toward which we need to aspire if we are truly to ensure that the starting point and subsequent conversation encapsulates a level of inclusiveness that allows for flexibility and freedom in determining where different stakeholders' energies are best invested. How can we ensure that such investment results in high quality and high equity of provision? It might only be in considering these questions that we can legitimately make progress in establishing an evidence base through international collaboration and transnational and comparative research that shifts our thinking on how to most effectively meet the physical activity, sport and health-related needs of children and youth worldwide. To finish, I want to reiterate and revisit something that I stated previously regarding an unintentional and/or intentional partnership existing between all physical education stakeholders. That is, changes in one influences and should influence the other. I believe this is central to our readiness to engage with each other, given the need to develop a reciprocal trust and respect. Thank you.
And some of you are probably wondering who I am. I'm the Assistant Dean here at Learning and Teaching and a past board member of ACHPA Victoria and Fellow of ACHPA. But I just wanted to say a few more things,
Absolutely.
Anne, in follow-up to what you said and stress some of your points. I think you've really said to us that we need to understand our stakeholders. And we're all, I think, very good at working in our particular roles. But bringing those stakeholders together and forming those partnerships is challenging work that takes energy and time and the willingness to sort of step outside of our own institutional boundaries. The history of this lecture is, I think, an example of that work. In 2008 or just before 2008, we sat down with ACHPA, ACHPA National actually, and with the graduate school and with Peter, with the family, with the Duras family, and said we'd love to run a Fritz Duras lecture here at the university to celebrate Fritz's work. So that coming together and bringing a number of people over years to the graduate school and sharing with the community in relation to issues to do with health and physical education has been fantastic. I think with boundary crossing, a number of terms that you use, scholar, practitioner, practitioner, scholar, so trying to work across those. Teacher as researcher, teachers reading research, as you were sort of alluding, Abby, in sort of some of the work there. Teachers training teachers, you mentioned, and professional learning communities that aren't just of the community that we work with, but that go across those boundaries, so that involve multiple stakeholder groups. So really opening up that notion of collegiality. And so, all of those words, as you amply said, reflect, Fritz Duras and the work that he did in the community when he was here, from 1938 till the early 1960s. He lived that notion of boundary crossing. And we benefit still today from the bridge building that he did in setting up physical education in Australia. So just on behalf of the graduate school, on behalf of ACHPA Victoria, and the board members, staff, and other members of ACHPA who are here, on behalf of MGSE, thank you, Jim, for auspicing this lecture, and also for all the staff who are here from MGSE to see the lecture, but also to support the lecture occurring. Thank you very much, and thank you, Anne.
Well, thank you.